Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this student town hall virtual forum with Congressman Laurie Trahan. And to begin, town manager of Concord, Stephen Crane is going to say a few words to welcome the Congresswoman virtually to Concord. Stephen.
Thanks, Tom. And it's great to be here at this event and to see the students. And welcome, Representative Trahan. Good to see you again. And I think it's great to have the students here. And I know that you are a tireless advocate for the educational needs of our students at all levels. And we go back a ways. As I was saying before we started, that we started our careers on Capitol Hill, I think maybe in the same month many years ago.
When we were
yeah, just about when we were not too far removed from being students. And I think since that time, it's been really amazing to watch your career path and how you now really tirelessly represent the interests of our district, but also the interests of working people around the world. And so it's really an honor to be able to be here and say welcome to this remote meeting here with the students. And thank you. And I look forward to hearing the questions and answers.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. So Stephen's going to leave the Zoom meeting, but watch us from his office or from his home. Congressman Trahan, I also, on behalf of the Board of Governors and the staff here at the Concord Museum, I want to personally thank you for participating in tonight's Town Hall Forum and helping us to shine our light on a new temporary exhibit, Every Path Laid Open, Women of Concord and the Quest for Equality. We asked the 3 high schools in Concord, as well as your alma mater, Lowell High School, to nominate students to ask you questions. We didn't specify for them to nominate female students, but that is who they nominated, which is in keeping with our exhibit. And I'll introduce each student in order. We've done so alphabetically by first name. And I don't want to take too much time from the questions and answers, so we'll get right at it. I should just note to our viewers that we won't be taking questions on the chat this evening because we want the students to ask the questions. And I also want to explain to the viewers that Congresswoman Trahan has another event at 6:45. So while we've asked her to answer the questions as fulsomely as possible, we also asked her to keep her answers brief so that we can have each student possibly ask 2 questions. So our first student is, we thought we'd go alphabetically by first name. So our first student is Anna Skrekis. She's a senior at Lowell High School, a member of the Model UN, the Political Debate Club, International Language Club, Best Buddies, and the National Honor Society. Anna is going to attend the University of Massachusetts Lowell this fall and major in education and history. So Anna, you're up to ask your first question.
Thank you. Hi, Congresswoman. My first question is, the Immigration and Nationality Act allows the United States to grant up to 675,000 permanent immigrant visas each year. What would comprehensive immigration reform look like? And in your opinion, what is the reasonable number of immigrants that should be allowed into the United States on an annual basis?
Well, that's a great question, Anna. And first, let me just say it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And hopefully soon we get to do events like this in person, but I treasure the opportunity to answer your questions tonight. You know, it's interesting because when I think about immigration, I think about why my Portuguese grandfather and my Brazilian grandmother both immigrated to Lowell more than 80 years ago. They did so in search of a better life for themselves and their family. Worked hard, oftentimes doing 12-hour shifts or multiple jobs at a time to ensure that they could put food on the table to support their family. And so growing up in Lowell 2 generations later, you learn pretty quickly that my family story isn't unique. In fact, it's more common than not. Lowell, like many communities across our great state, is testament to the tremendous benefits of welcoming immigrants with open arms and ensuring that they have the resources necessary to not only build a new life here, but also contribute to our community. And that's the lens through which I view our immigration policy. And that's why the last 4 years prior to the Biden administration were especially difficult to stomach as our government worked diligently to strip protections from immigrants, including DACA and TPS recipients who have lived here for decades. That's why we took action in 2019 to pass the American Dream and Promise Act with bipartisan support, I should mention, and it's why we did so again with an updated version of the legislation this year. So this particular legislation provides vital protections to up to 3.4 million immigrants by offering a path to lawful permanent resident status for Dreamers, TPS recipients, and DED recipients. TPS holders and DED recipients they've built their lives and they've raised their families in our country. In many cases over decades while contributing to their communities, our economy, and Dreamers are Americans in every way except on paper. So these provisions, they've got overwhelming support from the American people, Democratic, Republican, and independents alike. And it's why we need your voices in the ears of Republican politicians in the Senate who are still standing in the way of passing this common sense legislation and ending a years-long war on immigrants who have made America their permanent home, and many of whom know no other home. So I'll get just a little bit more information. I was proud to join my colleagues in the House in passing two critical pieces of legislation to protect immigrants' civil liberties. The No Ban Act strengthens immigration law to explicitly prohibit discrimination based on religion and restores the separation of powers by limiting overly broad executive authority to issue future travel bans like the last administration's Muslim ban. And then the Access to Counsel Act ensures that individuals who are seeking legal entry to the United States at a port of entry and are subjected to prolonged inspection by Customs and Border Protection, that they are guaranteed the ability to communicate with legal counsel. And these bills affirm this truth, that all people are entitled to civil rights, civil liberties, basic human decency. And they reaffirm that here in America, there is no place for discrimination on the basis of religion, which is xenophobic, unconstitutional, and morally reprehensible. So in terms of the exact number, I don't have one in mind. I think we do need to overhaul the way our immigration system works so that the process is fair, humane, and reasonable. That means providing a path to citizenship for people living and working in our country and creating a process that keeps pace with the demands of our economy. And so we're going to continue working with the Biden administration and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, of which I sit on, to make sure any future legislation addresses those important priorities.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question comes from Arden Trudeau, a sophomore at Concord Carlisle High School, where she's a member of the swim team, class government, and chorus. Arden has a taste for adventure and hopes to not only continue her education, but eventually to travel around the world. So Arden.
Thank you. Hi, Congresswoman. So as a sophomore, I'm currently taking US history. And at the beginning of the course, we spent a significant portion of time learning about the election process, and in particular, the Electoral College. What are your thoughts about the Electoral College, and do you think it's time for any updates or change?
Well, Arden, it's another great question. I'm not surprised. We have a lot of women on the call tonight. And it's obviously something a lot of people talked about following the 2016 election when Donald Trump won the Electoral College vote, but he failed to win the popular vote by quite a large margin. And it was reignited last year when campaign spokespeople for his reelection campaign designed a strategy that was intended to repeat that performance and expected that if they won, they'd lose the popular vote by an even larger margin. So what's interesting is that a lot of people here in the Commonwealth and probably in a few other states don't recognize that we've already joined the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, something that can be just referred to as the Compact for short. And that means that we've essentially already committed as a Commonwealth to a system that would ensure that the presidential candidate who wins the national popular vote also wins the Electoral College and therefore the presidency. As you learned earlier this year, the current Electoral College system awards the presidency to the candidate who wins at least 270 of the 538 electoral votes that are available, which are allocated based on population, with each state being guaranteed at least 3 votes. And the compact would go into effect when enough states controlling at least 270 electoral votes have agreed that they will commit to awarding their respective states' electoral college votes to the winner of the national popular vote, meaning the winner of the national popular vote would become the president. So there's still a long way to go before this gets to the 270 vote threshold, but it's something worth keeping an eye on as the national conversation surrounding the future of the electoral college continues.
Great. Next up is Catherine Richardson, a junior at Concord Carlisle High School. Catherine enjoys playing karate, soccer, and the piano, and she hopes to study engineering or architecture. So Catherine, ask your question, please.
Hello, Congresswoman. What do you feel the role is of the next generation in tackling climate change, and how do you see the responsibility of high school students intertwining with legislation like the Green New Deal?
Well, we need more women in science and engineering fields, so I'm glad that you're pursuing that, Catherine. You know, it seems like just yesterday that I was physically in Concord before the pandemic, talking about the climate crisis and the need for serious immediate action to address it. But that was more than 2 years ago, and despite efforts for myself and a large number of my colleagues in Washington, not much has changed at the federal level. Despite the gridlock that brought climate action in Washington to a grinding halt, during that time, climate change has continued going full speed ahead, and the ramifications of that have been very clear. Temperatures have continued to increase, more frequent, more severe storms, flooding, wildfires have cost hundreds of billions of dollars each year. Last year alone, the United States faced 22 extreme weather and climate-related disaster events, with losses exceeding $1 billion each. That's a cumulative price tag of nearly $100 billion. So we need to be clear about how we talk about this. There is no greater threat to life on Earth than the growing climate catastrophe, and only immediate action, public engagement, federal legislation will prevent these worst case scenarios. So it's why I signed on as an original co-sponsor of the Green New Deal when it was introduced last Congress. And the lack of action at the federal level is why I helped reintroduce it alongside Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey earlier this year. And the Green New Deal lays out an ambitious agenda for the United States to make the transition to clean, renewable energy within 10 years. In addition to rising to meet the moment where we're at in this climate crisis, it also massively raised awareness. And the Green New Deal has inspired young people across the globe, never mind our state, to organize and defend their futures and that of our planet. So it's thanks to that advocacy that the debate around climate change has been reignited, and that more members of Congress are rallying to bold solutions like the Green New Deal than ever before. And it's also thanks to young people that climate action was a focal point of the presidential election last year, and that has translated into real substantive actions by this administration since first taking office in January. So look, I fully support the president's decision to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, and most importantly, to recognize the climate change as the national security threat that it is. But we can't stop there. You know, Congress needs to act to ensure a national coordinated response to the climate crisis, and that starts with passing the President Biden's American Jobs Plan. This is a once-in-a-generation investment in rebuilding our physical infrastructure while also tackling the climate crisis in a way that treats it with the urgency. So when announcing the plan, President Biden pledged that every dollar spent on rebuilding our infrastructure during his administration would be used to prevent, reduce, and withstand the impacts of the climate crisis. So that includes a $35 billion investment in the full range of solutions needed to achieve technology breakthroughs that address the climate crisis and position our country as the global leader in clean energy technology and green energy jobs. That means, you know, we're not going to be slashing jobs as we work to modernize our infrastructure. Rather, we'll be making new ones that put workers' health and financial well-being first. So I think one of the most important things for me as a mom and as a member of Congress is ensuring that the next generation of Americans, my daughters included, certainly all of you, inherit a nation and a planet in better condition than the one we inherited. And I believe that starts with advancing the ambitious principles laid out in the Green New Deal and ensuring that they are incorporated into every piece of legislation so that we can so that we can protect our planet for generations to come.
Great. Our next question is from Morgan Glazier. Morgan is a junior at Concord Academy, where she's involved with the dance project, mock trial, tour guiding, peer buddies, student orientation, the Social Justice Club, and she's co-head of Veg Heads, the Vegetarian Vegan Club. She took a class that resonated with her in the US presidency and that's encouraged her to become more politically active and has led her to ask this question to you tonight.
Terrific.
Thank you. Hi, Congresswoman. As a member of the Health Subcommittee that oversees the U.S. Department of Health, the CDC, and the FDA, how are you addressing the growing health disparities that have developed due to COVID-19? Is the model for the COVID vaccine being free and available to everyone something that is being for more preventative care, such as other vaccines? Is this something that you are advocating for? How is the Subcommittee for Health working for better plans for coordination between federal and state level government in the event of another public health emergency?
Oh, what a great set of thorough questions. Starting with the question on health disparities, this is something that was one of the main areas of focus when crafting the American Rescue Plan. You know, the most recent relief package that we, passed by Congress and was signed into law by the president. And we've seen just how grave the disparities are in our healthcare system over this past year. And that's especially true here in Massachusetts, where communities like Lawrence, that are predominantly made up of non-white and Spanish-speaking individuals, are hit the hardest. And that's why the American Rescue Plan provided $27 billion specifically designated to address disparities in pandemic response. $7 billion of that funding went directly to community health centers like those in Lawrence, Lowell, and Fitchburg to support their efforts to save lives and get shots into arms. And these community health centers are established to make sure that healthcare is accessible to everyone in a community, especially our most vulnerable and traditionally overlooked families who may not have as much trust in healthcare professionals. These facilities have been spearheading efforts to respond to the pandemic since it first started. And this investment, along with President Biden's Community Health Center vaccination program, which basically sends additional federal doses to these facilities and above what they get from the state, is critical in ensuring the professionals can do their jobs safely and effectively. So when it comes to your questions about coordination in the event of another public health emergency, that's something we've remained focused on in the Pandemic Preparedness Caucus, which I started. Our supply chain was a huge concern at the start of the pandemic, throughout the pandemic. It still is today, especially when it comes to vaccine distribution. In the early days of the pandemic, we were made brutally aware of how ill-prepared we were as a nation for a global pandemic. It left our hospitals scrambling for basic things like PPE to protect doctors and nurses, and ventilators to treat patients who were critically ill with COVID-19. And then we saw the issues with a fragmented and disorganized plan to distribute the COVID-19 vaccines once they were approved late last year, something we've seen we've been able to rectify to the point that more than 70% of adults here in the Commonwealth are now vaccinated. So I think the solutions that we've developed and implemented over the past year are going to be key to making sure that we're never caught flat-footed by a public health crisis like COVID ever again, that we wring out all the lessons along the way, and we prepare ourselves for the future. I mean, we have an obligation as the federal government to be prepared moving forward. And it's something that I've been working on in my role on the Energy and Commerce Committee, specifically the Health Subcommittee.
Great. So Anna, we'll go to you to your second question.
Thank you. So my second question is, a bipartisan committee was recently commissioned by President Biden to examine expanding the number of Supreme Court justices and instituting term limits. How do you feel about altering the tenure of the justices by a simple majority in Congress, and also considering that the number of justices has remained at 9 since 1869, How do you feel about increasing that number to as many as 15?
Yeah. So as you stated, Anna, in early April, President Biden issued an executive order creating the Presidential Commission on the Supreme Court of the United States. And it's composed of a bipartisan group of experts on the court and the court reform debate. The commissioners includes former federal judges, practitioners who have appeared before the court, legal scholars, as well as advocates for the reform of democratic institutions and the administration of justice. And this commission was created to provide a close look at proposals of reforming the courts, taking a close look at the court's role in the constitutional systems, the membership and size of the court and the court's current practices. So I'm very interested in the results of this commission to know what is within Congress's power to do via a simple majority and what is necessary to do using, perhaps a constitutional amendment. I mean, I think what's clear to most people with the naked eye is that reforms to the high court are long overdue. For the past 2 decades, the Supreme Court has been politicized and weaponized in elections and in the halls of Congress, namely the Senate. And what we saw in 2016 with the refusal by Senate Republicans to even hold a hearing of then Justice Neil Gorsuch's nomination was a travesty. So too was their decision last year to show their hypocrisy by rushing through Justice Amy Coney Barrett's nomination just weeks before this election. And so this isn't how the founders of our nation intended for the judicial branch to work. So it's obvious that something needs to be done to restore fairness to the third branch of our government. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the President's Commission recommends before I jump into that debate.
Arden, you're up for your second question.
The media often depicts this country as being very divided in 2 separate groups. I was wondering if you could tell us of any specific times you've worked with other elected officials across party lines. And are you hopeful or pessimistic about the ability of Congress to work together in a bipartisan way to tackle the challenges we face as a nation?
Yeah, no, I think we've, look, despite the environment shown through social media, I in the networks, I am enormously hopeful. Over the course of my first term, I found many common sense individuals across the aisle and across the country who were willing to work with me on issues that both our districts, faced. I'll give you a couple of examples. Every community along the Merrimack Valley knows just how serious combined sewage overflow issue is. They've had to largely foot the bill while Washington sat on the sidelines. This is when, this is happening to the Merrimack River, where combined sewage overflow is actually resulting in raw sewage being dumped into the Merrimack River. It's been a problem because the federal government has divested from maintaining water infrastructure in our country and water treatment plants. And, this is an issue that I've been active on since getting to Congress, and it's one that has a lot of bipartisan support. Just last month, I reintroduced actually my legislation to increase federal investments in combined sewer overflow projects in communities like Lowell and Lawrence and Haverhill, cities and towns that are working to tackle these CSO issues head on, but they can't afford to make these upgrades. So we're able to get components of that legislation passed in the House as part of our infrastructure package in July, which is testament to the bipartisan nature of getting something done on this issue. But, we haven't stopped there. Like the legislation on CSOs, nearly half of all the bills I introduced in my first term were with the Republican co-lead, which was key in getting 5 pieces of legislation passed and signed into law through a very divided Washington. I worked to find common ground on issues facing working families. You heard me talk about the Pandemic Preparedness Caucus, which I founded with another Republican co-chair, and it's focused on making sure that we prepare for pandemics through our legislative and our agency system. I also, worked on bipartisan legislation to take the stigma out of addiction. I've been working with the bipartisan addiction working group since I got to Congress, and And we have legislation that's focused on giving doctors the tools that they need to have the conversations, to diagnose and to treat people who are suffering from substance use disorder. So, you know, I think what a lot of people don't love to talk about is that there is a lot of common ground on a wide array of issues, but that's not always what gets covered on TV. And it's not usually the issues that get a lot of clicks online. So, but I have to tell you, when I first ran for office in 2018, I promised to work toward solutions with whomever I could. I don't work on self-promotion. I work on, getting things done. And that's an approach that has led to legislative achievements like strengthening pipeline safety standards following the Merrimack Valley gas explosions. And it's one that I fully intend to maintain as long as, I have the honor of representing all the hardworking folks who call this district home. So I hope that gives you a little bit of insight into what doesn't often get covered on TV, but what does actually happen more than you think on the ground.
Great. Catherine, you can ask your second question.
What are your thoughts on sanctuary cities?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question because I think the term sanctuary city is a perfect illustration of just how politicized our immigration system has become. Look, we've come a long way from the days where Ronald Reagan, a staunch Republican that many members of the GOP claim to look up to, praised immigrants as part of what makes our country great. And now there are those in our political system who use immigration as a weapon designed to instill fear in unsuspecting Americans. And they do that by using terms like sanctuary city to get people to rally to their cause. And that's how the issue has gotten so polarized, right? We're at the point where any Republican who works with us to try to find common ground in the immigration debate is automatically characterized as supporting open borders that allow anyone to come across. And just to be clear, no one wants that. No one's trying to make that happen. But we are being forced to operate at extreme fringes of policy debates on divisive issues, and that's preventing us from seeing obvious common ground, like ensuring that Dreamers and TPS recipients aren't forced to leave our country, which in many cases, as I've mentioned, is the only country they know. So those folks that we're protecting, our Dreamers, our TPS, our DED recipients, those folks are every bit as American as you and me, with the exception of a piece of paper. And it's time for us to put the partisanship aside, and it's time for us to reach solutions that work, for millions of people who live, work, pay taxes, and raise families here.
Great. Morgan, you can ask your second question.
What has been the most challenging aspect of being a member of Congress generally, and specifically as a woman? What do you see changing for female Congresswomen to reduce challenges and barriers?
Oh, well, that is a terrific question. I think we see the effects of more women in Congress every day. I know when we were putting together the American Rescue Plan, and we saw, the expansion of the child tax credit, saving our child care system on the brink of collapse. There were fingerprints of all the women that were here and who have been working on those issues for a long time. I think that what we're talking about right now with the American Families Plan, in terms of putting a huge investment in universal pre-K for all 3 and 4-year-olds, investing in our children with free community college, really in making investments into our childcare system for the long haul, so that we get those 2 million women who have been forced to leave the workforce back to work and part of our economic recovery. That is hugely important. So, I remain optimistic. I mean, since I've been here, I've been able to vote on the violence against women reauthorization, equal pay for equal work, raising the minimum wage. So many of those issues impact women. And, that is what you get when you have not only more women at the table, but, more more women in the discussion, because sometimes I was a tech executive before I came to Congress, and I was often the only woman at the table. Let me tell you, it's hard when you are only one voice, especially representing so many. And we need many, many more women. We need more women in our boardrooms across the country. We need more women in the halls of Congress. But I think that's what gives me unbelievable optimism, especially as I think of the election that I won, because that was a watershed year for our country in terms of women getting off the sidelines, women like me who never thought they were going to run for office before, but doing that because we wanted to change the direction of our country for our daughters. And I think that this forum series coincides with the museum's exhibition on Every Path Laid Open, Women of Concord and the Quest for Equality. And I do think that it's important that as we talk about the quest for equality, that we acknowledge not only how far we've come, because we have come a long way, but also how much work we still have ahead. Never before have we seen so many women at decision-making tables, but we still have a long way to go. Getting a seat at the table is just that first hurdle that we face as women. And so I think that that's important for all of us to remember, for all of us to elevate and lift each other up. But it's something that I get a lot of motivation from when I'm working, with women in my community, women in our district who are really providing the support for women like me to go ahead and serve our communities. So I'm enormously optimistic about our future together, especially as we approach getting more women into every room together.
So it's a nice segue to a question. Megan Ding, who is a senior at Middlesex School and recently got accepted at the University of Chicago, and she received a full Air Force ROTC scholarship. Unfortunately, she got stuck in traffic, so she has not been able to join us. But let me ask her question, because it's about women not in this country, but in Afghanistan. So if she were here, she was going to ask you, Congresswoman, do you agree with President Biden's decision to remove our troops from Afghanistan? What do you say to veterans in your district who fought in that war? Are you concerned about the reports in the news that suggest that the Taliban is on the rise and that Afghani women's lives are in peril, and maybe even more so once our troops depart from that country?
Yeah. It's a great question. Megan sounds like a force for asking it. And so I am concerned, but I do agree with President Biden's decision to remove our troops from Afghanistan. And frankly, there couldn't have been a better goal on which to do it than by the 20th anniversary of 9/11. I do believe our men and women in uniform have been put into harm's way for far too long. And we're now in a position where it's time to bring them home. The administration was right when they said that we've known for a long time that our military presence would not solve Afghanistan's internal political challenges. And I think what's important to note is that a withdrawal of American troops is not a withdrawal of American diplomacy and advocacy in Afghanistan or in the region. I mean, this also wasn't a decision that we made on our own. I mean, this decision by the president came after a substantive review by the Department of Defense and following careful consultation with the Afghan government, our NATO allies, and our partners who are still serving alongside our troops in Afghanistan. So I agree that the reports of dangerous conditions for Afghani women are extremely alarming, which is why it's so important that we continue to hold this administration and future administrations to the commitment that the United States will remain deeply engaged with the government of Afghanistan and use every tool we have to stand behind the diplomatic process and support the Afghani people. And I think that's the key follow-up to this move. And it's one that President Biden laid out clearly when he announced the withdrawal last month.
Great. We have time for one more question. And Anna, you've alluded to it, but Anna had a question that we know is very important to you in your work. So Anna, go ahead and ask the last question.
So while the complete data won't be available until sometime around the end of this year, preliminary data suggests that there were over 90,000 overdose deaths in 2020, with the majority of those deaths being caused by opioids. What do you or your colleagues have planned to present to the House of Representatives in this session to combat this crisis?
Well, this has certainly been an issue I've been really focused on during my time in Congress. Right when I got to Washington, I helped form the bipartisan freshman working group on addiction. I can't call myself a freshman anymore, but we still meet. We meet once a week. We hear from experts. We discuss solutions to address the opioid epidemic that's fueling this addiction crisis. And I think what's become clear over the past year during COVID is that we simply can't afford to leave a global pandemic and return to a nationwide epidemic that's killing tens of thousands of people a year. COVID hasn't slowed down the addiction crisis. In fact, experts predict it made it much, much worse. So what's clear is that as we continue to work to get shots in arms to defeat the virus, there is a need for government officials at all levels of government to prioritize the screening for and the treatment of substance use disorder as part of a coordinated response. Beyond that, we've seen an abundance of data and research that shows many doctors and other healthcare providers still prescribe highly addictive pain medications at rates widely considered to be unsafe. And that lack of standardization in addiction prevention and treatment has undoubtedly contributed to the 70,000 Americans that die of overdose each year. So I introduced the bipartisan medication access and training expansion. We call it MATE, the MATE Act. It equips physicians across the healthcare continuum with the tools necessary to recognize and treat addiction by standardizing and mainstreaming access to addiction treatment medications and ensuring that proper training on how to safely prescribe these powerful drugs. We weren't able to get the bill over the finish line in the last Congress, but I am confident, given my new seat on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which has direct jurisdiction over this issue, that we'll be able to work with the chairman and the administration to get it to get it passed. And I'd say we can also take simple steps to raise awareness about the addiction crisis. And each of us has had some sort of personal experience with the opioid crisis, whether it's been directly with a family member or a friend or knowing someone who's been affected, and letting them know that they're not alone, I think, is key to removing the stigma associated with addiction. It's why I'm a big proponent of federally recognized Overdose Awareness Day, which is a day held in remembrance of the lives lost to overdoses. I recently sent a request to President Biden asking that he honor the day by lowering the US flags on all federal buildings to half staff. And I partnered that request with a piece of legislation that would recommit the federal government to recognizing and supporting the goals of Overdose Awareness Day. And this is a really serious issue and one that's gone unaddressed for too long, but there isn't one singular piece of legislation that's going to fix it. But I think it's clear that a whole of government approach is necessary if we're going to prevent, future tragic losses of life to this epidemic.
Thank you, Congresswoman Trahan. Would you like to just share a parting word? We know your schedule is tight, but before we close, I'll give you a parting word and then I'll say one as well.
Yes, well, I so appreciated the questions. They were so thoughtful. They covered a lot of what we're working on right now here in Washington. We have this moment right now with this administration, with control over the House and Senate, although those majorities are slim and we're finding out exactly how fragile they are. But it is a moment for us to rethink how we want to build our country coming out of this pandemic. And the president often uses the slogan, build back better. And I think what's really important is that we take that to heart. For so many people in this country, going back to normal isn't good enough, right? We have unearthed so many disparities, whether it's in our education system, our healthcare system, our criminal justice system. And I think we've got an opportunity to address those disparities and really have equity permeate everything that we do. And so that's a really important moment for us all to be engaged in. I think it's what makes me really optimistic about coming out of this pandemic and using all the tools that we have to accelerate our economic recovery, but also making sure that we're creating an economy that is inclusive of everyone. And so making sure everyone gets an opportunity to participate in our economy is really a goal. And that's how we get at that income inequality gap that we've seen widen over decades. So you all touched on so many of the issues that I'm working on and that are so important to me and so important to the district I'm proud to represent. And hopefully I can convince you all in years to come to join me by getting off the sidelines and not only being active on the issues that you care so deeply about, but leading in whatever domains you pick: public service, science and engineering, climate crisis. We're going to need all hands on deck in the future. And you've all proven yourselves to be very sharp minds just by the questions that you asked. So thank you so much for letting me spend some time with you tonight. And hopefully we'll get to share time together in person soon. I know, Tom, I can't wait to come back to the museum, and I look forward to doing that real soon.
We'd love to have you, and when you come, we'll invite these 4 students to be here to have their picture taken with you. So Anna, Arden, Catherine, Morgan, we thank you for your questions, for representing your families and your schools so well tonight. One of the goals of our exhibit is to inspire your generation to lead this country forward, much as Congresswoman Trahan is doing so ably in our time. Also, we remind all of our viewers that on Thursday night, we'll have another forum related to the exhibit with Chief Justice Margaret Marshall, the first female Chief Justice of the Commonwealth, who wrote the groundbreaking marriage equality decision. Harvard professor Danielle Allen, who is an expert on questions of inequality, especially inequality related to race, and Jane Mandello, the first woman to manage Harvard's endowment. So that will be Thursday at 7 o'clock. We'll hope you all join us at that time. Congresswoman Trahan, the students who asked the questions, thank you all so much.